Welcome back to the Honest Pod, the podcast for people who are ready to be honest. Okay. Okay. But I'm containing myself right now because, guys, for those of you that are OG listeners, and I know we have a lot of new listeners in this past year, but for those of you that are OG listeners, today's a real treat, guys. Today is a real treat because, and many of you have asked, this is not just something that I'm like, we should do this. Many of you, multiple of you have been like, how is Shara doing? When's she coming back? What's happening? So I finally got my sister, sweet Shara, to come back on the podcast and spend some time with us. Oh, welcome to the Honest Pod.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I feel like it feels with that intro like I'm a wrestler. You know how they always have like the biggest like intros to coming into the ring?
Yes.
And it feels like that a little bit. So I don't have this like the shorts on or like the belt, but like in my head, I'm just the pageantry is there.
You're coming in, you're coming in shadow boxing.
Honestly, I know I haven't done this in such a long time. I have been holding my breath this entire time. I don't know why I'm not supposed to be making a sound while she's talking. And so I've been holding my breath. I'm like, the audio is going to pick up that I breathe. That's not okay.
Hey guys.
Which is like even worse because now I'm coming on and I'm out of breath.
You're
so
winded.
Crazy. I'm so excited to be back. I literally all morning, I'm just so excited for it. I miss you. I miss everybody. I'm excited for the conversation. And what the heck's been going on? The same way you guys feel that way about me, the same way I feel about you guys. Like, how the heck are you?
Well, I mean, here's the truth. This podcast would not be here if it weren't for you. I did not even want to do a podcast. I was like, no, it's going to be too much work. And you used to work for Freedom Movement. I don't know how many people know that, but you used to work for Freedom Movement. And one of the things that you were really pushing for was this podcast because you were like, Karrie, we've got to get your stuff out there. We've got to get, our conversations that we would have offline were conversations that we were like, I think a lot of people are having these conversations. And so honestly, this whole podcast wouldn't be here so it just feels so right that you would come back and visit with us and just see where you are, where we are. And, per always, this was just today was crazy. And I
literally don't know what happened in your morning. So I'm excited to hear it.
It started off so great when I sent you a voice text this morning of hey, here's what I would like to talk about. I know we had discussed that a little bit already, but it all seemed so promising.
What happened?
It all seemed so promising at 8:30 this morning when I voice texted you. And then right at 9 o'clock, I had a client just dropped a bomb at 15 minutes before her session is over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't leave her in this.
Oh, I'm so nosy for that. I'm not going to ask you what she said, but everything in me, and I know the listeners are too you're going to leave us hanging like that.
Yeah. It was definitely think about when you've ever been in therapy and then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I actually think I need to talk about this. And I've never talked about this with anybody. Oh, yeah. And I'm going to tell it to you, but I'm going to tell it to you 15 minutes before our session is over, which I was like, I need
the drop and go move where it was let's talk about it, but not really talk about it. Okay.
Right. She wanted to drop, but not go. She was like, I want to drop this and I want you to stay longer. So,
nice.
Yeah. Ended up going over 20 minutes. Then I was on this podcast. It was a really great podcast, but literally I was on this podcast for an hour and 20 minutes. And right near it, which is, we have long podcasts, but I was not planning for this. And then I had another client afterwards and I ended up being 40 minutes late for that client, which I ended up giving her a free session. I say all of this because midway through the podcast, I would say about 40 minutes into the podcast, I was really listening and I'd put my hand on my chest and it's just I'm feeling what he's saying and we're simpatical. It's happening. And I realized that this whole time I have had my shirt on backwards.
Listen, better backwards than completely off. You know what I mean? That's how you know it's a busy morning.
That's how I'm going to call the W, is that my shirt at least was on.
Oh, right. God. Yeah. Listen, here's what I pray. I hope whatever podcast you are on, that just a little tag was flipped up on your neckline that people will be able to recognize what's going on here. That would make me very happy.
It also would make them go, this girl, she's smart, but also she's one of the people. Like
She's like us.
she has her shirt on backwards. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I can't change my shirt midway through this. My shirt is on backwards. And I don't know for those of you listening, but if you've just ever had one of those days where just nothing is going right, we get on this podcast. We're so excited. Shara's on, her camera's not working. We're just like, we need today's a mulligan. We just need a new
What's
situation.
a mulligan?
A mulligan is when you're playing golf. I mean, you don't know golf terms? What's wrong with you?
Well, I didn't realize you've changed. Wow, what the golfer these days. I'm so sorry.
A mulligan is where I actually don't totally know what it means. Mario just uses it all the time, and it's basically like it's a wash. Basically, it just means it's a wash. So somewhere in golf, you do something.
Like some people where it's like, that didn't mean much.
You just forget that one happened. And it's a golf term, and it's something to do with that. And all I know is it's basically just, it's just like, it's a wash. Pretend this day didn't happen.
It's a wash. That ball went into the forest. Let's just forget about it.
It's a mulligan. Okay. Yeah. So there's your golfing terms for the day.
I was like, is it a mullet again? Because also kind of the same meaning. Like, it was a dark time. It was a mullet again. Oh yeah. Every person growing out their picks has a mulligan moment.
Mullet again. Do you remember? And then we're going to actually get to this topic, you guys. But when Shara used to live with me, and we used to do this where we were Dave Ramsey'd, and we would put all of our money into envelopes, like grocery and doctor and gas and whatever. And then we had this one envelope called miscellaneous
for the cleaner, sweet miscellaneous who comes to the house.
So Shara was looking through the envelopes, and she's like, "Who is miscellaneous?"
I was like, I know you don't have a nanny because I live here, but I'm like, for sure the cleaning lady probably miscellaneous.
Maybe she's miscellaneous. So when I say mulligan and she thinks mullet again, you guys, it's on brand.
It's all I say. It's all on par. Another golf term for you guys here today. You're welcome.
Oh gosh. Well, anyway, it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
And speaking truth to our morning that even though your camera is not on, there is goodness to be had in today. We will redeem the day.
Yeah, we will.
Through laughter and honesty, which is still what we do here at the Honest Pod. And so I want to talk about, well, first of all, I just think like there's a catch up that has to happen for the fact that you have been off the air for over a year. And in the course of that time, you have had so many changes. And I was thinking about like what I want to talk about on this podcast today as we intro you back into, and we're going to do some episodes with you throughout this month, which is going to be awesome. And I was just kind of thinking about what happens when you have to leave something old, something that you care about or like, and then you have to step into something new, but that something new is met with so many pivots, pivot after pivot after pivot. And so why don't you just catch us up just a little bit, Cliff Notes version of what has kind of happened in the past year? Where has Shara been? Yeah. How are you? How the heck are you?
No, it's so crazy because I'm trying to think. I think I left the podcast when I was pregnant and I was living in Orange County. So for those who are newer to the podcast in the last year who have no clue who I am, I used to co-host with Karrie on this podcast and stepped away as I was in the process of about to have a baby, but also moving and like 19 other things. And it just felt like something I couldn't do. So I stepped away. But in that, I didn't realize how much change was going to be happening. So to catch you up, we moved to Palm Springs. I say Palm Springs because that's like the most recognized
Yeah,
area
no.
in the Coachella Valley, or
Mhm.
Coachella, because people are like, "Oh my gosh, you live in Coachella?" Like, yeah, like
Yeah.
festivals all year long. No, that's not what happens
Me
here.
and my baby.
Woo, we're partying it up. But yeah, so we moved to the Coachella Valley. Um, I think it was 3 months before I actually had my son Elijah. So we were in like, no, it was sooner than that. It was March. So it was like I was 2 months away from having a baby. We're moving into like a brand new home. So like literally it was crazy. I was like, I'm gonna go into labor early. Like there's just no way I'm not, because we're moving into a house. And also at the same time, my husband Devin was like transitioning jobs from one job to a new job, and he was in the throes of trying to make that happen. Um, the baby came, and honestly, it's so weird. I was a nanny for a lot of my life. I've hung around kids most of my life, but I never realized like how much life changes when you have a kid. So like that
Yes.
in and of itself, you know what I mean? I feel like brought the most change for me, and the most like grappling with an old life and a new life. Because like
Mm,
obviously we're in a physical new space, and I think that was more like a physical representation of like what was already going on in us emotionally. Like it's so, no one really talks about it, I think. Like
mhm.
obviously like you have a child, like everything changes, but I feel like there's this mourning of like, as a woman at least, like who you
Yeah.
were, and trying to grapple with like who this new person is. What does this new person look like? All the while having absolutely no time to discover what or who she is,
Mm,
because you're so busy. So I
yeah.
feel like that's kind of, this last year for me has been crazy, if I'm being honest, here on the Honest
Yeah.
Pod.
I mean, here's the truth. You're right. What does it look like? You are at the beginning stages of motherhood. I am, I'll always be a mother, but I'm near the stage of my kids starting to graduate out and move on, into their lives. And we still have a few more years, thank God. But that's starting to kind of be a reality for me. And it's an interesting thing that you bring that up, because when you have a child, there is, like you said, who am I? I've never been a mom.
Yeah.
So who am I as a mom? I'm not going to be the same person that I was. I can't be. I mean,
Yeah.
like I have to change. And yet also for me, as my kids, as are conversations that me and Mario are having, as my kids are beginning, we're starting to think about them graduating, leaving the house and
So
doing the
crazy.
things. Then who am I then? Like
Hmm.
these are two really like market. I think we're both sitting in these really market moments of introspection and identity, of going, yeah, I mean, I know I'm a child of God. Like I get that. Okay. Like
Yeah.
I get I'm a child of God. I get that he loves me. I mean, I'm saying that sarcastic. I love that I'm a child of God, but I
Yeah.
understand that. But like who am I, and what am I bringing to the world as myself, as
Yeah.
Shara, as Karrie, but also as Elijah's mom, writer Rocco Roma's mom, Mario's wife, Devin's wife. So how has that journey, unpack it a little bit for us,
Yeah.
because has it been, but butterflies and rainbows? Has it been, what has it been like for you to kind of
Yeah.
sift through what that's been, who you are, and what that's been like
Yeah.
to try to find you in the process of having this wonderful gift of God
Hmm.
and this baby? What has that been
Yeah.
like for you?
Well, it's so interesting, because I don't know if anyone else is like me, but it's not until you have conversations like this that you like actually can look back and be like, oh, that's what it was. But when you're in the thick of it, you're like, what the what the
Yeah,
hell's
you're like,
going
I just
on,
got to
man?
get through
This
Tuesday.
is crazy. Yeah,
But I'm going to
exactly.
put pants on today.
Yeah, I'm like, what is
A
going on?
shirt on
But
backwards. I just need to know.
so God, life's falling apart. But I feel like it is such an interesting conversation or thought or experience to feel like this time in my life is requiring me to change. It's not like
Mm,
oh, I think I want to reinvent myself. You know what I mean? It's like, no, this situation in my life, whatever it is, for me, it was becoming a mom. This is requiring me to change. And how do
mm,
I show up for that? And to be truthful, for the first 8 months,
Mhm.
I showed up kicking and screaming. Like, not
Mm.
necessarily when it came to like loving my child, like that came so naturally for me. And I'm very thankful because I know that that can be difficult for some women. But I showed up kicking and screaming to like leaving who I was behind and
Mm.
becoming this new person just because I had anyone who had known me prior to having a child, I had worked so hard the last couple of years to become the person that I was showing up as before
Mhm.
baby. And it was,
Mhm.
there was so much freedom and there was so much happiness and so much goodness in that time in my life that transitioning into like a new person, I wasn't ready. I felt like I had just tasted real Shara for the first
Mm.
time in like a very long time. And now I felt like I had to let her go again to become something new.
Mm.
And I wasn't ready for that. And obviously throwing on the, the icing on the cake, like major postpartum anxiety,
Mm.
transitioning, like being further away from family, and being in a new place and all of that kind of stuff. Like it was so difficult. And with any sort of change, I think in marriages, anyone who's like experienced a lot of change in one time, like there's obviously a lot of tension around just like me and my husband's dynamic. And it was
Sure.
just like a really hard year. I'm so thankful to say that now we're in such a good place. But looking back, there's obviously things that I wish that I could do different. But mainly, I think the one thing that raises to the top is I wish I would have shown up for Shara more.
Mm.
I pushed myself to do, and it's definitely a pattern in my life, like to be better. And I did things that were just not kind to myself
Mm.
in that period of time, in that, 8, 9 month period of time, and things that were just kind of cruel. Like, I don't, I think we did a podcast about this a long time ago, but I have very much this like, my mental image I have is like me shoving myself, being like, get it together, like figure it
Mhm.
out. Like, you know what I mean? Come on, get back up on your feet. Like that kind of mentality and self-talk. And
Right.
it's super damaging when all of like that Shara, a year ago needed someone to sit next to her, to like rub her back, to be like, it's okay to rest, it's okay to be sad,
Mm.
not an inner bully saying, get back on your feet, you're fine, you've been through more than this. And
Yes.
there's a lot of pressures that come with being a new mom and showing up a certain way, and trying to force myself into that was very detrimental to my mental health
Yes.
for a lot. I know
So
this is like
when
really heavy, like welcome back, Shara. Like,
No, I mean, this is I think it's helpful for even the listeners to know, like, you know, I've asked you to be on the podcast earlier. Like there's, hey, everybody wants to like hear from you and stuff. And the kindest thing for you to do was to say, no, I decline. I'm not ready to step in and I don't even have my own thoughts around this yet.
yeah.
And so, we had a conversation like a month ago or something, and, a 3-hour conversation of just, hey, how are you really? And that's
Hmm.
where, you were able to articulate, I'm doing better now. I
Hmm.
was not good. And
Yeah.
without shame, and maybe there was a little bit, but that idea of like to look back and be able to go, like, I love what you said. I went in kicking and screaming, and then I wish I would have shown up differently for Shara. And
Hmm.
I'm curious, what do you mean by you showed up kicking and screaming? Because I hear a little bit about the inner bully. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, no, the kicking and screaming was more so like I was not wanting to transition my life into being this like new person. Like, um, it just felt like I obviously wanted to be a mom, and it was more of the lifestyle that I was like going into, like, oh, I'm home all day
Mm.
and my life completely revolves around and like anything I want for me is now on the back burner. I guess that
Mhm.
it was like I was leaving myself to like fully
Mm.
give myself to something else. And I had just started prioritizing myself, like, what was it, like a year and a half prior,
Right. For
to
like
where
the
like
first time in your life.
yeah, for the first time in my life. And so like selfishly, like I wasn't ready to fully like let myself go, not in the sense where I battled it out with like my child, because
Hmm.
I was so happy to do
Yeah.
that and to like be that mom for him. But I also was not loving who I was becoming out of. Like, I didn't see, I was like, am I just like, and there's nothing wrong with this, but for me and the goals I had set for myself previously, I was like, am I just going to be a stay at home mom? Like, I found
Right.
myself not leaving the house for 5 days in a row. Like, I was like super isolated. I didn't want to go and like be social. It was just this huge like difference in like people. It felt like it was like,
Mm.
this was previous Shara. She was super outgoing. She was super excited about goals. She had just started going to school, like to
Mhm.
go for like psychology, and was doing the podcast, working for freedom movement. I just gotten into this relationship that was so good. And then fast forward a year, literally a year and a half later, I'm in a new place. I have like, I have a job, but I can barely do that because I'm also trying to parent a newborn. We're
Mm.
still moving into the houses. There's like the house, there's boxes everywhere. Like I can barely get up. You know what I mean? I'm so
Mhm.
tired. I'm emotionally drained. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to be anything for anyone. I don't know. It was just so vastly different. And I wasn't ready for that. Like no one warned me that that was what was going to happen. Everyone warns you about the like, oh, postpartum depression, which is so real. And so I was waiting for that to hit. But
Mhm.
like everything else, like the changes that came with it, I just felt like no one had told me that this is what this looks like. Now, I just wish that
Mm.
I could have, the way I'm showing up for me now is how I wish I could have shown up for me earlier, you know?
And why do you think it was so hard for you to show up for yourself?
Um, I think that I th- truthfully, I think I just didn't have anything else to give. I
Mhm.
um I didn't have the energy to like, I don't know, like be who I needed myself to be. Like I was in full on survival mode for a long time, and part of that being the severe postpartum anxiety that was like crippling. It was like back when like I was 21 type of anxiety, like
Right.
catastrophizing, like just making these crazy situations that would just rule my life, not wanting to leave, like panic attacks all the time. I just didn't
Mhm.
have the energy for it. So there needs to be kindness for
Mm.
that. Like I really did the best that I could
Mhm.
um, with what was going on in my surroundings.
It's so interesting because I don't think that many women um, will have the courage or allow themselves the courage to actually speak about this, to
Mm.
actually talk about like, can I love my kid and simultaneously in essence resent part of what this is taking from me?
Yeah.
And it's so hard as a mom because we are told like, you had a baby, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you, you need to be all happy, all in, and completely self-sacrificing and love it all. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that narrative's in my head, not to mention you're in a brand new marriage, you've only been married a year, and
Hmm.
you're in a brand new home, left all your family, and we are a pretty tight-knit family, so left
Hmm.
all your support systems. What I hear is, and I wonder for those, this would be so great for you guys to share this, especially with new moms, where there's just someone that gives them permission that you can really love your kid and be having a really hard time. Like
Hmm.
that can happen, and that
Yeah.
doesn't make you a bad person, that makes you human.
Hmm.
And I just wonder about that time for you. Was there anyone, now you might not have let this happen, but was there anyone pursuing you in a way that allowed you to be honest about what was really going on?
Yeah, I'm very thankful that one of our sister-in-laws, Cassie, she's been like a couple of years ahead of me in everything she's dealt with in life.
Mhm.
But we have very similar paths, so she definitely would pursue me. But like I said, like I don't think I had the capacity to be completely honest with
Mm.
where I was at or where I was going. I fully any back to a podcast, one of my biggest defense mechanisms when I am sinking is I self isolate
Mhm.
like nobody's business. Like that, it will, all my friends, family, with the exception of my mom,
Mhm.
I will just like go into a hole and not talk to anybody. And I went
Mhm.
in that hole hard during
Mhm.
that period of time.
Did mom
And
say anything to you about it?
Yeah, like we had open conversations with like me struggling, but there was no solutions. That was the
Mhm.
issue. It was like, okay, I can be aware of what's going on in my life and I can share it, but somebody help me. So I definitely started, I went back into therapy and had an awesome therapist who brought some light to what exactly was going on in my body and with my anxiety
Mm.
and all of that, which was super helpful. Just understanding, like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. I'm actually, because I had such a traumatic birth and so much transition and traumatic experiences happening with these transitions, my body was going into like fight or flight from my childhood. Like all the trauma got I don't know how to say it. Like it just got
Like,
reignited. And so
yeah,
my body didn't know that,
unearthed.
like, yeah, unearthed. There we go.
Mhm.
It didn't know that this happened, 15 years ago. It felt like it was happening in the moment. So my body was responding the same way as it did when I was younger.
Mm.
And it made so much sense once I kind of like figured that all out. And we did some good work. But it's been a slow process of just, I truthfully, here on the Honest Pod again, I had to go on an apology tour to a lot of people because my
Mm.
isolating was so bad that people that I had never isolated from were highly affected. And I had to, once my head, when I felt like I was kind of out of water a
Mm.
little bit, I had to go around and like apologize to a lot of people for the way I treated them because it wasn't fair to them and, icing them out. And um, yeah, like because that's just, it's what I have done in the past, but it was a pretty long period of time that I did it last time.
Mhm. And
So
that's definitely a part of healing. I want to put a pin in that because I want to circle back around to the process of apology.
yeah.
But what I want to ask you is what was the shift from here you are in this kind of like, basically like underground, like dug a hole
Hmm.
underground, you and Babes is safe, but you're
Yeah.
not safe.
Yeah.
You're, isolating and whatever. And what was the shift that began to happen that helped you or made you realize something, I got to change this, something's got to
Yeah.
be different.
Yeah. So it's actually very interesting because I'm in the throes of it now. But I would say maybe like 5 months ago, I kind of hit this point where I was like, Shara, we can't live like this. And
Mm.
I've had other moments like that in my life, but I'm like, why why am I letting myself, like, I'm watching myself sink? Why am I not doing something about it? What does that say? This is my internal dialogue here.
Mhm.
What does that say about my self value that I will literally watch myself sink and not do anything to help me?
Mm.
Like, and it was just like one of those moments for me that I was like, you are worth trying for. Like,
Mm.
and really this like exploration of like realizing my self worth had become so low that, like, of course I wasn't doing any of these things for myself. I didn't think that I really deserved it.
Mm.
And so it actually really did start with kind of going on a journey of like my identity again. And because, anyone who's a mom knows you just lose your identity so
Yeah.
quickly when it comes to like, and I remember reading this book that was like, a measure of a good mom is how little she makes herself.
Mm.
And it that's kind of like them talking about society, like how, that's a good mom when she doesn't take care of herself, when she doesn't shower, when she doesn't like put on makeup, or
Mm.
she doesn't go to the gym. Like that's how you know she's a good mom, because she puts all of her time into everybody else but herself, which is just such a damaging
Yeah.
like thought. And I was just reading this book and I was like, I want my son and my husband to see me thrive as a mom and
Mm.
not just be a all in facilitator of their lives. Like,
Mm.
I want them to see a strong, healthy woman, and
Mhm.
I wasn't that. But what does that look like to me? Like, what does Shara want? What does this new version of Shara look like in my mind, ideally? And what can I do to slowly start inching towards that? And
Yeah.
it started, and this is going to sound so freaking cheesy, but it really
Please.
is like the realest thing. It started with journaling. And
Yeah.
it was all I could do at the moment. You know what I mean? I'm
Right.
waking up every 2 hours. And so in the morning, I would sit down and I created this journal that was like, I had the verse of the day, the focus of that verse, a thankfulness section, what am I feeling today section, a
Mhm.
journal section, and then an affirmation section. And it was 2 full pages of this huge journal, and I would fill it out religiously. And
Mm.
I started to mentally switch because like I started focusing on like, who does God say that I am?
Mhm.
Um, this will make me emotional talking about it because it's so like it was so real in the moment where you just do it until
Mhm.
your heart believes it.
Yeah.
And so every day I would just like, okay, what does God say about me? What am I thankful for in the midst of my crap show right now
Mhm.
where I feel like I can barely get my head above water? What am I thankful for? And what do I feel today? Let's like validate that emotion,
Mhm.
and be okay with that. And then obviously journaling, but then like, what are my affirmations? Like, who am I?
Mm.
And like, let me speak that over myself.
Mm.
And it just started with that. Like, and that's all that I can do. And like, the more I did it, the more I was like, okay, wait, like, well, I deserve this. Like, I deserve to like not stay in bed all day. Like, let me go up, like, let me do
Mm.
this for me. I deserve to as little as eat healthier, or I deserve to go on a little mom vacation, like things that I just wouldn't do.
Mm.
Just started being a little bit selfish, but it wasn't selfish in the sense of like, I need to be self consumed. It was just like, I need to prioritize myself a little bit right now.
Right.
And I started showing up different. And I'm so thankful to say that, you know, 4 or 5 months later, here I am. Like, oh, and also I got on medication. Like,
Mm.
thank God for medication. Like, I
Yes.
finally, actually, our conversation was super pivotal. We had like a month and a half ago or whatever it was.
Mhm.
And I was like, why am I torturing myself with this? If there's something to help me, why
Yes.
won't I let myself be okay with like
Needing help.
peace and happiness? And like, why am I fighting that so hard? So
Mm.
I just started doing things for myself rather than against myself. And slowly but surely, like, I feel like I've transformed as a person. Like I have become very passionate actually about seeing other moms because I've had many conversations with other moms and women who feel like they're in a very similar place, and I just like want to yell at them being like, prioritize yourself.
Mm.
Like, you are worth it. This is a worth thing, and you need to let yourself like be okay with being happy and like being at peace and prioritizing things that you love. Like, what's wrong with that?
Mm.
I don't know. I
This
get
is
very
just,
passionate about it.
it's, I mean, it's just so good. Did you made up that journal yourself, or you got a journal that had that in there?
I made it up myself, but it kind of came from something that I created when I worked at Freedom Movement. When back in the day, we were talking about creating a guided journal. I don't know
Mhm.
if that ever happened or
Mm-mm.
not. But it was like kind of the prototype that I had
Mm.
created back then. And I just created it for myself. Like, I would just write it down on each page, like verse, write the
Yeah,
verse,
gosh, I could
focus.
just so see that in like, you know, uh, finding yourself as a new mom or whatever, just
Hmm.
having that for women to really be able to hold on to. But I was flying. This reminds me of a story, but I was flying the other. I don't know. I fly all the time, but I was with Roma this particular time, and Roma was sitting next to me, and the stewardess, we know that they say this, but the stewardess came up and she was like, "Oh, how old is she?" I'm like, "Oh, she's 12." And she was like, "Okay, just remember, if we're in an accident, you need to put your oxygen mask on first." And I was like, honestly, I was offended because I
Yeah,
was
you're
like,
like, immediately no.
I fly all the time. I
Yeah.
already know these rules.
Yeah.
Like, she knows that I fly all the time. Of course she
Yeah.
doesn't know that. But I'm like, and my daughter's 12. Like, I feel like, okay, I get it. And I'm like, why am I offended by that? And
Yeah.
and I was offended because I'm like, well, that's common knowledge that I would do that. Like, that's common
Yeah.
knowledge. We hear it all the time. You put your oxygen mask on first. But this woman is trained to tell this to anybody that has someone under the age of 12,
Mm.
to go and tell them as a reminder, because when we are in shock, when we are in trauma, when we are in hard situations, we forget about the need of caring for ourselves so that the
Yeah.
person next to us can be cared for. And so she needed to remind me just in case. And I just think
Hmm.
about what you're saying, like, you know, I want to be a good mom. I want to be a good wife. But if I'm giving everyone else oxygen and I'm over here with no oxygen,
Yeah.
I pass out, I die. No one can benefit from me anymore.
Yeah.
And
So
that's just
true.
like what I feel for so many of us, like so many women I encounter. Well, I don't want to be needy and whatever. And it's like, well, you have needs.
Yeah.
You have to eat, you have to breathe oxygen, you have to, you
Yeah.
have needs. You need a roof over your head. So to say that you don't want to be needy is to deny your humanity. We
Yeah.
are in need. And so, I love that you said there was this like shift to where it first, and this is what we talk about. I mean, I know this is a plug for Free and Fully Alive, but this is actually true, that there's this shift of first, we have to connect to ourselves. What is really going
Yeah.
on here? I need to
Yeah.
actually take a look at my life. And then I love what you said about your journaling, that you went in, which is really invitation for God to come
Yeah.
in and go, okay, I don't even know if I believe this, but would
Yeah.
your spirit come in and begin to be a salve to these places that I don't even know how to put these pieces together?
Yeah.
And then the third part of my book, which is something that I knew you would do this because you've been living with this and with me for so long, but
Mhm.
it's biblical, is that third piece is really connection to others and how we kind
Mhm.
of heal in community. And I want to bring you back to this idea around apology,
Mhm.
because I know a lot of, well, maybe not, but women sitting and listening to this might think,
Yeah.
well, Shar was hurting. Why does she need to apologize?
Mhm.
She's the one that was hurting. She is the one that was suffering. She was the one that, was in the steeps of her own emotions and brokenness and heartache. And
Yeah.
yet, she's having to apologize. And I want to get your take on it. And then I want to share something really, really cool that Shar may not realize that she's just shared, but I want to share at the end about something that is really, really cool about how that all went about and how that happened and how
Yeah.
that's super biblical. So tell me a little bit about the prompting.
Mhm.
Here you do some of this healing, you start feeling better, and now you must have felt in some way prompted
Yeah.
to go and apologize. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So in kind of my like self-discovery and like learning to value myself, there was just this like almost this understanding of like what others were trying to do for me that I refused to let them do in my isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And friendships and relationships have always been very finicky for me. I'm not great at them. I do my brain says alone is safe. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always wrestle against that with relationships because they just are hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um but in my apology, I think once I was able to get healthier and like my self-worth started to develop, I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
I just realized that like I value these people so much. My actions didn't show it. And the way I would deserve more, I felt like they deserved more. And I don't know if that's like the healthiest thing, but like I also knew that I didn't want to lose them, but the way I treated them was not right at all. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there was something in just like owning that. And there was so much fear that went into it. I'm thinking of one particular conversation and I just like lost it at the end of breakfast. And I was just like, I'm so sorry for this last year, like, and not being able to show up as a friend when you've been so good to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, for the first time, I felt like I was in high school. I thought it was going to be like she was going to break up with me. Like,
Right.
I
Mm-hmm.
can't do this anymore. It's been a year of trying to pursue you and
Right.
with nothing in return. And I really thought that's the response I was going to get. And I was just like, I understand like whatever like boundaries you need to put around your heart. If this friendship doesn't feel safe for you because of how I understand that these things have value. And she was so kind and she was like, anywhere you need me to meet you is where I will meet you. And
Mm.
she's like, because you mean that much to me. And I remember it was just like, wow, like
Mm.
It was so kind
So
and
kind.
understanding, and I just wasn't expecting that, honestly,
Mhm, mhm.
because, my inner bully's like, "Well, here we go. You're gonna lose a
Yeah, I
friend
mean, and the
because"
truth is not even just your inner bully, but truly the data that you've had from people that are supposed to love you and really
Yeah.
were very cruel with and very contingent. Their love was very contingent upon your actions.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just an inner bully; it was data that you have lived out with a lot of people
Yeah.
that really turned when you were not perfect or you didn't show up the way that they wanted you to. They left you and they pulled their love
Yeah.
away. And so that feels real.
Yeah, and I just feel like I needed, even whether or not she responded well or not, like, I needed her to know that, like, I cared about her enough, or these people enough, to be like, "I know that that was wrong, and I love you, and I'm so sorry,
Mm,
and I'll try my best to do better." Um,
mhm,
which I feel like there's a lot of stuff like changing in my life right now in such a positive way, and I feel so good about my relationships and even like valuing friendships again. So
mhm,
I feel it's at a really good place now, but there was a scary moment of like, okay, I'm gonna put my heart on the line here, but there's a chance that
mhm.
that I
That the
did too
damage
much
might have been
damage.
done or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Mhm. Yeah, and here's what I want you guys, I mean, I did not plan for this, but literally Shara is living out my book and I just feel really good about that. Like
Oh,
I'm like this is what we talk about, but one of the things I have a diagram in my book and sometimes it helps to make sense of a natural progression of what the Holy Spirit leads us into when our heart is tender and soft. And so there is a progression towards restoration. And when we are not honest about our heartache, we move into what I call the cycle of false freedom. So that isolation is like, okay, this is where I can stay safe. This is what's going to allow me to feel freedom, is to kind of turn inward. And that's what you were doing. And it's also to avoid pain, right? Like I don't want to feel the pain of what it means to have lost myself and deal with people's expectations and all the things. And so here you are in this kind of cycle of false freedom until enough was enough and you woke
hmm
up and you were able to engage in honesty the grief of your story. Here I
yeah,
am, and the story that you were currently living. I'm not even just talking about your whole life story, the story you're currently living. And the story that you're currently living needed grief. It needed to be
yeah,
able to grieve what feels like has been stolen, what feels like you've lost, what feels like you've had to give up, and what, all the complexities of the pivot, the stepping into the new, that some of the new you didn't even want, and some of the new
yeah,
you really did want, but
hmm
all of it seemed to have been chosen for you. And even
hmm
though there was a cognitive, I'm choosing to marry you, I'm choosing to have sex with you, that means we're going to have a baby, and I'm choosing,
hmm
yes, we'll move. But those things happen and then they create dynamics that we've never been in before. And
yeah,
so here it brings up, and this is, I have a diagram that talks about when there's places in our story where goodness was shattered. And there was this goodness that you were kind of experiencing in the healing process that needed to happen. And although these good things came into your life, they disrupted the pattern and the process in which you were doing. And so that
hmm
moved you into kind of this false cycle of freedom of like, okay, I'm going to bury my head. I'm going to do old adaptive behaviors, which are now maladaptive. They're not serving me well, because that's all I know. Until
hmm
you are woken up that day and that process began for you to get honest and grieve. And what we talk about in the diagram is that to bypass, to like almost have like a bridge over that cycle of false freedom, we have to engage grief. We have to
hmm
actually allow our hearts to grieve, and not grieve towards despair, which that's what that cycle of false freedom offers,
hmm
but grieve towards restoration, grieve
Yeah.
towards God, grieve with God, so that God can begin to change our heart. What I find so interesting is that the next step that we have in this diagram is, as grief makes its full connection to self and to God, it allows grief with others, which the next step moves us to repentance. It's a natural outcome of a healthy response to godly grieving. So
Mm.
the apology wasn't, oh, I was so terrible, whatever. that's part of your healing, of restoration, of going, I actually get to turn from that which has kept me bound. And what has kept me bound is this place of believing that isolation is where I'm going to find
Mm.
safety, when actually safety and healing is found in the arms of God, knowing
Mhm.
myself and connecting with others. So that act of repentance, and I hope you guys, I know it's kind of hard to follow so much what I'm saying, but it really, this is literally a diagram in my book. But that repentance piece, it's not for condemnation. It's for invitation back to
Mm.
intimacy. The very thing that you have been craving your whole life is to actually be seen and loved as you really are. The good, the bad, the hard, the ugly. You want to
Mhm.
be seen in all of that and still loved. And that moment sitting at breakfast with that friend, when you said, here I am, I have messed up. There is grief and there is sorrow, but I don't want to act that way anymore, but I will
Mhm.
accept. And when she offered kindness, that kind of kindness allowed for there to be restored intimacy, to be seen and known in that moment, which moves us
Yeah.
to a greater, what I believe is supernatural sense of gratitude. Man, I did
Mhm.
not deserve this. And yet I
Totally.
received it, which allows us then to actually move into greater forgiveness towards ourselves, towards others, because you've been forgiven in a way
Yeah.
that maybe wasn't deserved in the way you received it, then allows us to go out and offer that same kind of goodness and kindness to others where they may be suffering, where you have suffered. And this
Mhm.
is literally my entire book. You walked out the entire process, and I know you're still in process, but
Mhm.
you've walked out the entire process of what it looks like to begin to heal. And it
Mm.
is stunning.
Well, that's cool. We didn't even coordinate that.
I know. And
You're
I'm
like, "You need to
listening
go
and
through
I'm
all
going,
this trauma this last year because you're gonna be a case study for my book." Imagine.
totally. I'm just like listening. I'm going, oh my goodness, I knew it worked. No, I mean, there's a lot of people that do this, but this is actually not about obviously Karrie's book, but what it is about is actually God and how
Yeah.
Jesus tends to his children and how
Mhm.
there is formula. You will not be stuck forever in your grief if you actually take the steps to allow godly grief to move you towards Jesus and allow Jesus into that grief
Yeah.
rather than allowing grief to move you to despair. There's
Yeah.
worldly grief and there's godly grief. And you were in worldly grief for a
Yeah.
while. And
Yeah.
that's what you knew. And then there was a transition. And that journaling prompts was the verse of the day. Here we go. All right, Jesus, I'm honest with you. I'm going to invite
Mhm.
you in. Do what you want to do. Here we go. And it
Yeah.
progressed you into a natural and biblical way of
Yeah.
restoration.
Well,
Pretty
and I
amazing.
think it's so cool too because I feel like there's this huge shift in my life over the last, few months where like things that I've wanted my entire life, I'm starting to feel this fulfillment that I've been searching for when it comes to like myself and my identity and like feeling grounded and like
Mm,
just like I can dream again and the hope and like
mm,
there's just so much that's been restored to me and honestly like so much more than it had ever been present in my life before.
mm,
I feel so thankful for that. And so I know it was such a dark chapter, but it is almost like we talk about like seeds or stuff, they have to be
mhm,
planted and then they're in the dark. I think you did a message about that or something. They're in the
mhm,
dark, and there's so much pressure on them and it feels like where's the sunlight, but as it's being watered it will grow and it will see the
mhm,
sun again, and it'll become something it never was before. And it feels like this is like I'm obviously still in process, but I feel that. I feel the shift and I feel
mhm.
so close to God and I feel so close to myself
Yeah.
and understanding myself, and
And
I
close
feel
to others.
happy. Yeah, others. Yeah.
And close to others. That's the huge part of the piece of the puzzle. I mean, basically what you're saying is, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I I know that the Lord is with me. And even when I couldn't see him, he was guiding me. He
Yeah.
was protecting me. And near the end of that, we know that passage so well, but notice the progression. We're walking, God's protecting, even when you're terrified out of your mind. And then near the end of the valley, he says, and I will prepare a table for you in the midst of your enemies. And it's always like, well, why is he saying that? Well, there's such beauty in what you are talking about right now. Is you're still somewhat in the valley, you're moving out, you see the end, you see like the light, you see okay, we're kind of moving towards, but before you kind of step out into the new, the new valley you're in, or the new realm in which you're going to be stepping into, there's this place of stopping and feasting and looking at the place of your enemies, these places
Mm.
where the enemy caused isolation and brokenness and heartache and
Yeah.
hopelessness. And as you feast in the midst of the dirt, hope rises. Hope begins to
Yeah.
rise, because now you're looking at your enemy and you're seeing, okay, you're a lie. That's not
Mhm.
the thing that's going to fulfill me. That's not the thing that protects me. That false sense of safety is kept keeping me bound and broken.
Mhm.
And yet what God has done in my life, and what I have allowed him to do in my life, has actually moved me to a place where I can sit on a podcast as if we are feasting for
Mm.
the valley that you have walked through, and we're feasting together, and I'm going, tell me, Shara, give me vision into what the enemy has done, because we're not, as we're feasting, we're not in fear of that anymore.
Mm.
We can see the light, but we also can see the truth of what you were in. And as we
Yeah.
feast together, the enemy and the lie, just, it loses its power, and
Yeah.
something out of what seemed so dark and hopeless, hope is growing. And that's that verse, that's that
Yeah.
whole verse. And that's what you've lived out this past year. And
Mm.
it's been I'd imagine, heartbreaking,
Yeah.
uh and also necessary,
Yeah.
necessary for you to find you.
Yeah. It's, I think, I hope you don't mind me taking a moment, but I just feel like anyone who's in this position, I know we're talking a lot about like motherhood and, babies and stuff, but I really do feel this like prompting that if you're someone who tends to get lost easily in
Mm,
others, whether that be in romantic relationships or even friendships, to where you find yourself feeling empty, or some of these things are resonating with you, like this is for you too.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and there is hope in and beauty in finding yourself and prioritizing yourself and loving yourself. And you don't need to throw yourself in front of a truck to have other
mhm,
people survive. You know what I mean? Like
mhm.
you just don't need to
Right,
do that.
right.
And I'm super thankful that I was able and invited back onto this podcast, because these conversations are so healing for me too. And I don't
Mhm,
talk to most people like this ever. And I'm thankful to have a safe place to come, as the Honest Pod always is, to just
mhm,
share my heart and my stories. And
mhm.
I feel like whenever I come on, I'm always like, well, guys, been through a lot. Who's ready to hear it?
I mean, that's just the truth of all of us. No, and I appreciate that, Shara, of just ending with that thought of like, look, yeah, we're talking about this season of motherhood, but I know so many of you sitting out there are like, well, I'm not in the motherhood portion, but gosh, I can resonate with the isolation and the darkness and the heartache and I can't even get out of bed. That resonates with me. And just
Hmm.
to know that, there is hope. There's hope
Yeah.
in that Jesus is protecting you, and he's guiding you, and he's inviting you into the story that you may want to avoid. But it's only for your healing that he's inviting you in. And he's tender and he's kind and he's slow and he knows your heart. He knows all that you've endured, and there is hope on the other side. And I love that we've kind of found you, Shara, not, 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, but, a few months down the road where you can look back and it's fresh.
Yeah.
It's right on your back. It's fresh. And I really feel that we are sitting here together, and you all that are listening are feasting with us as we sit and we see what the enemy has tried to do, not only in Shara's life, but also in yours and mine. And we can feast together as a community and go, man, we really are in this together. And that if the truth sets us free, then naming the truth helps
Mm-hmm.
others be free too. So I appreciate you, Shara, coming on, sharing your heart with us. And we're gonna have Shara on for a few more episodes where we'll be talking about some other topics and diving into some more heart matters. But we just really wanted to give Shara some time to be able to share with you, which I think sets us up for really being able to understand and know more fully where God is leading us in this next few
Mm-hmm.
weeks, and just to be in prayer as Shara is continuing her journey. And I know all of you just love her so much. And you've told me at multiple occasions, when's she coming back? And to be able to have you come on so honestly and just share your heart with us means a lot to not only me, but I know to our listeners. So thank you for sharing today.
Yeah, thank you. I love you all.
Yeah.
I love you,
Well,
and I love you all listening.
I know. So, to the thousands of listeners
I know.
that Shara doesn't talk
No,
to
please.
anybody, but she'll talk to all of us.
I'm about to say, what was it they used to do? The eight people,
Yeah, my 11
the 11.
listeners.
There it was. Yeah,
Yeah, we've grown a little bit since then, but it's still, if I just wrap my mind around it being 11 listeners, we're fine. We're just
we're
fine.
good.
Yeah.
That's what's so funny. Like conversations after, like it's like, okay, guys, well, don't tell anyone what I just said, okay? Because
I
listen, I was
know.
just super honest, and nobody say anything. All right, this was
Let's
all
just
said
keep
in
this to
confidence.
ourselves. Also, if you could share and review, that'd be great. Well, thanks again, Shar. I love all of you guys. Thank you guys so much for spending an hour of your time with us. May this bring more honesty and permission to you to show up as you truly are. Invite God into those spaces and know that you are not alone. And may God's goodness walk you through whatever valley you may be in. And until next week, keep being honest. Talk to you soon.